Councilmember Boland, I'm sorry, did you have questions or comments?
I had comments, not questions.
Okay, thank you. Questions? Seeing none, let's go to comments. Councilmember Boland.
Several of my colleagues are more concerned about tone than substance. It's like they've forgotten that they're politicians, that they signed up for this scrutiny, that somehow, sometime, somewhere, someone guaranteed them that there would be no dissent or disagreement. But all they can hear, all they choose to hear, are the loudest, most disorderly critics, and not their quiet colleagues who have, in fact, done their homework. Make no mistake, this claim that the ordinance itself is divisive is a political strategy. As someone who plays and teaches chess, I'm more than a little offended by Councilor Rallo's cynicism, questioning Councilor Flaherty's motives for bringing the legislation. But his unfortunate comments that we heard on his hot mic give away the game. Ad hominem is how some opponents of this ordinance approach legislating in general. If one disagrees with their political opinion, one is personally insulting them. It's the ultimate ad hominem defense. But then you can see this in the parliamentary motions that they make. I note that my colleagues are quick to prioritize staff when the issue is one on which they agree. But when staff, for example, propose allowing duplexes by right, suddenly their strong concern for the opinions of staff weaken. I note that my colleagues are quick to refer legislation to committee of the whole instead of standing committees because they claim to want to hear from all 9 members. Yet when there's an issue they firmly disagree with and a member who may well agree with them is unavoidably absent, suddenly they have no hesitation about voting on it anyway. At now 2:45 in the morning after more than 8 straight hours. This too is a political strategy worthy of criticism. They elevate and support staff and the public who agree with them already. They are not consistent or neutral in their application of rules of procedure. They're not interested in limiting the total time of questions or debate by instead spreading it out over weeks that would be respectful of everyone, including city staff, whom they're forcing to sit through this marathon. These are absolutely political choices. That's why the no votes referred it to committee of the whole. Now you know the real reason why these same colleagues have been such bitter opponents of the use of standing committees. Their inconsistency with referring to certain people by their first name, their willingness to deny sleep to everyone who attended this meeting rather than spread out a necessary and fundamental discussion regardless of its predictable outcome.
I love this dude.
Committee of the whole lets them get legislation off the agenda in as few calendar days as possible. If you keep people at a meeting for 8 hours, you make them sick of it. Any desire to get more information at the end of such a meeting is poo-pooed. Oh, we've been at this for 8 hours already. They don't want to guarantee that everyone is heard or that all facts are found. They want to make you sit through 8 hours so that you'll never want to come back again. It was within the power of a majority to prevent this train wreck by stretching this discussion out over at least one additional meeting. Ironically, by refusing to postpone, they're responsible for the meeting's monstrous length. Council opponents have made clear that they have no alternative and are unwilling to even hint at a timeline for developing one. Those members of the public who thanked us for being here so late should not have. Opponents of this ordinance had multiple opportunities to prevent this record-setting meeting, and they refused every time. I have never seen such an unprecedented demonstration of hardball in my entire career here. This is the longest city council meeting I have ever attended, with a bullet. One last thing I want to say, and a more general point, is to the reason why this legislation has been so difficult for Bloomington Rapid Center around, because we have never come to agreement on the definition of the word resident. For years, as someone who came to Bloomington to defend IU, my belongingness to the community was apparently an open question because I came as an undergraduate. When does the statute of limitations run out on being from somewhere else in a city full of college students? As far as non-students are concerned, the answer is never. Students have a lot of relationship to people experiencing homelessness in the same way. So I think it's time we decide, how do we define the term resident? I go to the ultimate source, the Bureau of the Census. The Census Act of 1790 established the concept of measuring persons, and they measure them according to what they call the usual residence of the person. It's defined as the place where a person lives and sleeps most of the time. This place is not necessarily the same as the person's voting residence or legal residence. They go on to say that determining usual residence is straightforward for most people. However, given our nation's wide diversity in types of living arrangements, The concept of usual residence has a variety of applications. Who they contemplate in measuring usual residence include people with a seasonal or second residence, people in group facilities, people in the process of moving, people in hospitals, children in shared custody arrangements, live-in employees, military personnel, and people who live in workers' dormitories. The two items in that list I left out, because I wanted to emphasize them, are college students and people experiencing homelessness. The key phrase in the census's definition is where they live and sleep most of the time. People experiencing homelessness should be counted where they are on census day. But federal law holds that someone counts as a resident of a certain jurisdiction after no more than a year, making a majority of that time 6 months. If someone lives in Bloomington for 6 months straight, Bloomington is their usual residence. They are a resident of Bloomington. But wait, you ask, what about the transients of people experiencing homelessness? What if they go back and forth between districts? There's a ready answer for this too. Students are frequently called transients as well because they move all the time, but their city address remains Bloomington even if their street addresses change. We have 3 at-large members of City Council. It is not possible to appreciate students or people experiencing homelessness as Bloomingtonians unless you recognize that they are at-large constituents. That means that anyone who has doubt about who counts as a resident of the jurisdiction overseen by the government of the city of Bloomington should have an answer. 6 months, and it doesn't matter on what street you find them on any given night. This means that people count. These are people. Students are people. People experiencing homelessness are people. The census counts everyone. It counts them regardless of their citizenship status. It counts them where they happen to be. To quote the census website, the U.S. Census Bureau is committed to counting every person once, only once, and in the right place. We know that parks are not the right place for those people, but they still count. They should still be treated as citizens of Bloomington. After 6 months, it doesn't matter where they came from. They are people just like the people some of my colleagues have heard from who have opposed this ordinance. They are people just like the staff whose welfare some of my colleagues prioritize over the welfare of other people. Let there be no doubt, it is incumbent upon the opponents of this ordinance to state affirmatively what their solution might be. They have yet to do so. They have refused to do so. I expect that they are not going to do so. Some of them have never introduced legislation in their careers. Some of my other colleagues have made their effort. They've advanced an affirmative argument. And all I hear is a negative argument from the opponents. They must step up. It's incumbent upon them to come up with a solution because this is inhumane. It cannot stand. And I can't believe that we are setting a record tonight on this, thanks to their intransigence. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional comment? Councilmember Rollo.
Difficult to say how to proceed after a long ad hominem attack by Councilmember Volin. But that is to say that I would like to point out that for the people who brought this forward, we understood that this was fast-tracked. It was brought forward in a rushed fashion. The administration said as much. They couldn't even determine the entire effect of the ordinance before it was introduced to council. So I find it a bit ironic that now we're being blamed for fast-tracking it. Another thing I'd like to say is that had Council President Sims been here this evening, I'm not sure it would have changed the outcome. I've spoken to him about this and many other things. And let me say I have the utmost respect for Council President Sims. So really what this amounts to, I think, is a very ambiguous and incomplete legislative document. It's superficially, it looks tenable. Superficially, it just says for anybody that you would approach, why not just let homeless people sleep in a park? What's the harm? And there's no cost incurred in doing that. Can't we just allow it? So that looks superficially like a very humane thing until you dig down, until you find out exactly what that means. It does create de facto homeless encampments in any city park. Now, it would self-evolve, and we can't ignore it. So the city is responsible in many ways, and so then has to prepare for that eventuality if it were to become law. So it is undeveloped, it's ill-conceived, it's ambiguous. It codifies homeless encampments in parks where we've already seen once fatality. I don't think that, as Councilmember Smith said, that this amount of resources, and we know it's significant resources, involves multiple departments. Paula McDevitt provided a scenario for Bryant Park alone. Are we going to ignore that and say that that's invalid? I don't think so. I think these are the people that manage the city, so we have to listen to them. So these resources aren't fully known, but they're substantial. And is it wise to commit those resources for some individuals who cannot find shelter at this time? Now, the charge is, if we don't approve this, we have no alternative. We haven't offered any alternative. It's difficult to describe the alternative because the alternative is evolving. We've seen success in low barrier shelters, and I think that we need to continue putting resources toward those. For those who can't find a place or won't find a place, I think that what was said earlier tonight by a member of the administration is that there has to be some means of discretion and leniency involved in helping them. But I think that to essentially effectively encourage people to camp in parks is inviting a substantial amount of hazard, not to mention, and the costs involved. Now, the costs go beyond just the monetary costs. The costs involve the impacts on, as we've heard from businesses, from residents, from neighborhoods, and so forth. We don't know those costs right now. And in fact, I don't believe that this ordinance has been vetted, for instance, in the Bryant Park neighborhood. I don't think we've asked the Bryant Park neighborhood about having a homeless encampment there and gotten a response from them, or the Elm Heights neighborhood, or the Somax neighborhood who utilize that park. So, the due diligence hasn't been done for this ordinance. It has divided the community clearly this evening. I mean, those who caution against adopting this because I think of very practical reasons are called all sorts of different names, right? And so we see that happening. Business interests that, have spoken out against it have been excoriated. These are the business interests that, by the way, contribute to the service providers that we're hoping to build shelters with. So I think that this is a terrible thing that's happened as a result of introducing what is a very shallow, incomplete Band-Aid, as has been described by the authors of this amendment. So this is not a solution. We need to allocate real resources from the city to organizations to provide low barrier shelters. Absolutely need to do that. Clearly, many homeless people need services provided. We have to continue to help those service providers as well as a community. I don't think this helps homeless people to sleep in public parks. I think that it's a mistake. And I wish that we could have had a robust discussion without having it voting on a very flawed city policy as we're doing this evening at a very late hour. So I will be voting now. Thank you all.
Councilmember Piedmont Smith and then Councilmember Flaherty.
Human beings have a right to sleep. And if residents of our city, members of our community, have nowhere to go, then they should be allowed to sleep in public. It's the only humane thing to do, and currently that is not allowed. Currently, they can be asked to leave, made to leave, forced to leave by police, and that is unjust. Now, I look forward to solutions brought by the 4 colleagues who are going to vote against this ordinance, but I'm not holding my breath because they have not really engaged with us as we have tried to find solutions. And what they have repeatedly said and what the administration has repeatedly pointed to is the longer term solutions that are being investigated by the group led by Efrat Pfefferman and Tina Peterson. Long-term solutions are great, but we have immediate short-term problems, life or death problems for the homeless community. And just because I said life or death, I need to once again reiterate that JT's death in Seminary Park in December was not because he was camping in the park. It was because of a variety of factors, but partially because his tent was removed. And that is from people who knew him and worked with him. Anyway, I would like to, sorry, my thoughts are a little bit discombobulated at this late hour. I would like to say that I do respect city staff, and I do recognize that city staff had a lot of work and a lot of dirty work to do. Dirty work, maybe I shouldn't have used that phrase. Maybe that was the police who had the dirty work to do, but I was referring to the staff who continually had to clean up at Seminary Park. I recognize this is hard work. This is probably not what they signed up for when they got a job in Public Works at the city of Bloomington. But you know, some of that could have been prevented if we had given the residents of that park toilet facilities. So anyway, and I do respect the staff that were here tonight and presented their arguments, and you know, they're doing what the mayor has decided. Now, the Councilmember Rollo said, you know, has anybody asked people in Bryant Park what they think about putting a homeless encampment in? Has anybody asked the neighbors who live near Bryant Park what they think about putting a homeless encampment in Bryant Park? Well, this ordinance does not put a homeless encampment in Bryant Park. So no, we have not asked. This ordinance gives the executive branch the option of setting aside public land somewhere in the city close to services for homeless encampments. So no, we have not contacted immediate neighbors of any park because that decision is not part of this ordinance. Councilmember Rollo also said that we need to invest more in low barrier shelters. Shelters are not the answer. The more shelter beds we create here, the more will probably be filled up by people coming from out of town. The answer is long-term housing. The answer is permanent housing. And that's what we need to work towards. But in the interim, we need to make it legal for people to just lay their head. We've all had a very long night. It's been very stressful. But everybody on this call, at least everybody on this city council, at the end of this, we can go to bed. And we know the police are not going to make us move. That's a luxury that every human being, it's not a luxury, that's a right that every human being should have. So let me see if I've covered everything that I wanted to say. Councilmember Rollo also says that this ordinance would not help people experiencing homelessness. Well, we've heard from people experiencing homelessness tonight, and we've heard from advocates for people experiencing homelessness, and they say, yes, it will help people experiencing homelessness. So I don't know where he thinks that, where my colleague thinks that he knows better than people who have actually had the experience of being homeless. So, in short, I think it's a moral imperative for us to approve this ordinance. And I think we have immediate short-term problems. And if my colleagues are opposed to this ordinance, I expect them to bring some solutions to these immediate short-term problems in the near future, and I would be happy to work with them on that. Good night.
Thank you. Councilmember Flaherty?
All right, thanks. I'll try to speak to a few things. Thanks for members of the public who stayed with us, and also to city staff and council members. I think the notion that this is rushed or flawed or poorly thought out, I just don't. I think that's really contradicted by the unanimous support from all of the sheltering agencies and members of the Continuum of Care Board. These are people who literally work for decades, in some cases, on these issues, and they know very well the ins and outs and challenges of every aspect of this. And we worked with them in its development. We worked with other stakeholders as well. We had many meetings with city staff. We didn't bring this because, when we did, because to fast track things or something like that. We brought it because we had reached a fundamental impasse with the administration. We had 4 meetings or so. It didn't make sense to continue having them when we fundamentally disagreed about an issue. This council apparently also fundamentally disagrees about that issue, which is, again, if an unhoused person has no place to go, literally no bed anywhere in this town where they can sleep, including in shelters, should they have a legal place to sleep? And the administration doesn't think so. That's incredibly disappointing to me as a resident of Bloomington, as a Democrat. Clearly our colleagues in Indianapolis sure think so. Every single Democrat up there thinks so. The Democratic mayor thinks so. You know, and this was really particularly clarified by the amendment that was brought and failed because it wasn't going to make any headway. If the concern was we weren't going to have permanent and transitional housing for folks, we added an amendment that would have just said simple shelter beds. Just if there's no shelter bed available to you, if there's literally no bed, should you have a legal place to spend the night? And sadly, in Bloomington, our government has said no. Again, I just find that so incredibly depressing. Regarding the weird attack about my alleged chess comments, I had an email from Jeff Richardson, who organized that meeting. He said, I listened to the unhoused portion of your remarks at a recent Elm Heights Neighborhood Association meeting. I did not hear anything about a chess game that you are allegedly playing with the city administration. I literally think that didn't happen. We had people who listened to it now and verified that, it sounds like, so that's pretty weird. I also remain very disappointed in my colleagues for insisting on an 8.5-hour meeting in which our council president, chair of the Public Safety Committee, and somebody who I know cares deeply about these issues was unable to attend. I think that was just a very poor move on our part. Again, just disappointed. And it's not because I think Councilmember Sims would change the vote. I think he was probably leaning against it. I just think this is very clearly an important issue to the community. We heard from, in fact, a lot of Black residents of Bloomington who felt particularly disappointed that Councilmember Sims, who they see as something of a representative for Black voices in Bloomington, was excluded from the conversation by virtue of the votes and procedural motions we made tonight. Not because he would change the vote, but because he should have been part of the conversation and part of the discussion. So again, I remain deeply disappointed in my colleagues over that. I don't know what else to say. This is a values thing, and that's it. All right.
Thank you, Councilmember Flaherty. Additional comments? Councilmember Rosenberger?
Thank you. Okay, I feel scattered here. I think I would start by saying I think disappointing has been the word of the night tonight. I would say I am thoroughly disappointed in the unwillingness to engage in this discussion. Ugh, I have some can'ts here. Like, I think you can't say we don't criminalize homelessness and that becomes fact. It's not legal to sleep outside, so it is illegal to sleep outside. We can't just say things and make it so. That was said at the committee of the whole meeting by a council member. I also think somebody said this in a meeting the other day, you can't say no without a yes. And that is about sort of one way you teach children, but it's saying you can't just say no without offering up a different idea. And I would say what we've heard tonight is the solution to this is a collaborative approach. But no, a collaborative approach is an approach, not a solution. So we've heard the administration say they don't have a solution, but we should ask the expert. And I would say, of course, the co-sponsors thought that was a really good idea. And actually, we talked about that in meetings with the administration. And then we talked to the experts. And this is the ordinance that got drafted. It's also what other cities are doing. So I would say not one person, either my fellow colleagues, anyone in the administration, or any public comment has offered an alternative solution. And I think there's a reason for that. I would say you can't compromise with people who are not willing to engage. And I think this meeting tonight shows that. The council members who oppose this ordinance have said many things. One told the co-sponsors what we did not do, how we weren't inclusive, I think was one example. But I would say she has no idea because she did not take part in any of the work. So it's hard to kind of know what went on and what didn't go on if you weren't present. Another council person said, and this has been spoken to already a little bit, that this is fast-tracked, but in relation to what? No one asked me how much time I've spent on this. I spend most of my days on council work, which I think is different from other council members that have second jobs or full-time jobs. And so over the course of the last few months, I've spent hundreds of hours on this. And as Councilmember Flaherty said, I think that shows by the amount of public support and the amount of support from people working in this field. Some of my colleagues in support of this ordinance say it's now up to the council members who oppose it to come up with a solution that works. But I'm actually not okay with that, because one council person who opposes this does not think it's council's role to draft legislation. Every council person was asked at the outset if they wanted to work on this, and the three co-sponsors are the three who said yes. So I don't want to leave this up to the people who haven't taken a role in this. I don't think that would be a good approach. So mainly what I'm saying is, I don't want to give up on this. I mean, I'm feeling very disappointed and very discouraged, but I looked up this little quote that I like: being positive in a negative situation is not naive, it is leadership. And that just really helps me keep going when I think there's so many barriers and so many roadblocks to trying to do good progressive work here. A lot of folks have already spoken to what is a Democrat in Bloomington. I don't think we have a good definition for that. It is interesting that in Indianapolis, 10 Republicans voted for this, and here we didn't even really get to give it the due diligence it deserved. People well, I don't know why. I'm not going to speak to the reasons why you didn't want to give it the due diligence it deserves, but like that is astonishing to me. So I will just say, like, today I was reflecting on like why I ran, and I looked at my primary speech, and just saying, you know, part of it was it's not okay to say like everybody is included here without actually taking the steps to make sure everyone is included. And when I was talking about that, I was talking about, you know, vulnerable populations and people with different backgrounds and people with different housing statuses. And I still just very much believe that's true, that like a reason I ran is because I'm sick of the status quo. And I think this is just more of it. And so I'm just going to keep going. I think these are really hard battles. I don't think it's dividing the community. I think a lot of people came out and supported this. And I think uncomfortable conversation is not dividing the community, but it is what needs to happen to move anything forward. So I'm just going to keep going. And I'm excited to work again with my colleagues who really want to find a solution for this. Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments? Seeing none, if I may, I'd like to share some thoughts. Several commenters, and I'm combining comments here, said, you know, I don't want to attribute motives to those who don't support this ordinance, but I don't understand why you feel that way. I want to at least share my thinking on that, and it may not be agreeable to you and it may not be satisfactory, but I'd at least like to try and explain my thinking. Most of it clusters in different areas. The questions I ask myself: what are the duties of a city? What are the duties of a council? And what's our best path forward legislatively? All right. So the duties of a city. One of the comments that has come up since last week is the notion that the city has somehow washed its hands of this, and those are my words, not the general words, but the city has said it's not their responsibility. I didn't take their comments that way. I took them at face value, and the notion that partnerships would be necessary. I expect the city to respond to issues of homelessness, and as a council member, I want to see that. Okay. I also think it's important to recognize what is beyond the expertise of the city, and I have thought of little else actually in the last several days, and I was trying to think of how to explain this point. And it occurred to me, and this is an imperfect analogy, but it occurred to me that we have police and firefighters and parks employees who are all trained in first aid. And many of our police officers are actually trained in basic trauma medicine as well. And they recognize that they can help someone who has been injured in a car accident or has sprained an ankle at a parks event or something. They also recognize when they encounter someone who is seriously injured, who is in crisis, that it's time to call a doctor. It's time to call an ambulance and get that person to the hospital where doctors and nurses can provide that specialized care. In some ways, this seems like a similar circumstance. So does the city have a role? Of course it does. Do I expect them to play a role? Absolutely. I also expect the ultimate response to be a function of partnerships. Okay. Duties of council. Okay. A few people have offered the comment, you know, to the effect of, you're just voting no because you don't want to deal with this problem. Certainly, you're entitled to perceive us that way if you like. I would respectfully disagree. Not believing that this ordinance is the best path forward is not the equivalent of not wanting to deal with this problem. At least for me, it's not. So I would offer that. The other thing is, I think about duties of council. We've heard a lot about inclusion tonight, and I think, I can't remember the exact circumstance, at a couple meetings ago, several people have made the comment that we need to listen to the people who are here. Look how many people have spoken in support of this ordinance. And I agree, that's overwhelmingly among public comment tonight. We have heard support for this ordinance. We also need to listen to people who, for whatever reason, are not speaking in this meeting. The people who email us, the people who call us, including people who have told us, look, I'm too intimidated to speak up. I don't want to get shouted down. I don't want to get called names. So we have to, as council members, yes, we have to acknowledge even people we disagree with. And that means there's going to, a range of viewpoints are going to come to us. And so I would offer that point as a duty of council. One other important duty of council, and again, this speaks particularly to the ordinance. I honestly can't get past my fiscal concerns over this ordinance. I really can't. At best, we have ambiguity over how much this will actually cost. We are the fiscal body of the city. I don't think we've even come near having an adequate discussion of what this would require in terms of staffing and what that costs. And in good conscience, I can't vote on legislation where that's so unclear. I would respectfully disagree that the 4-digit figure, I think it was several $1,000s last week, would cover this. I don't believe that's the case. I would respectfully disagree with that. But just in terms of the ordinance itself, my fiscal concerns are still there. So beyond that, several people have actually talked about urgency this evening. And I want to come back to that because I apologize if I'm stumbling here. It's precisely because of urgency that I think we cannot confine ourselves to only finding amendments to the ordinance that's sitting right here on the table. If we limit ourselves to only making changes to 2106, then I don't think we're going to have a particularly robust discussion. I don't think we're going to make progress even in 4 weeks' time, and we will burn up more valuable time. And I agree that there is a sense of urgency. So I would just offer those thoughts. Again, I realize that my thinking may be acceptable to some, but there it is. So with that, any additional comments? All right. Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll on ordinance 2106?
Yes. Okay, we are starting with Councilmember Smith.
No.
Sandberg,
No.
Rollo,
No.
Wolin,
Yes.
Rosenbarger,
Yes.
Scambalori,
No.
Flaherty,
Yes.
Piedmont Smith.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. And that fails on a 4-4 vote.